Hey, this is Matt O'Leary, and this is finally my top albums of 2016. I have been pouring my heart and soul into these albums, listening over and over again, and writing this thing. Man, it's taken a while, and that's just because 2016 has been such a good year for music, such a good year for me personally, and I couldn't really cut it down beyond 30 albums, so I'm going with that because I have a lot to say about these albums, so let's get it going. I'm actually going to split the video into two parts. The first one will be 30 through 16, and then the next video will be my top 15 albums of the year. Actually, before I start, I want to say just a little bit about me, just as a music listener, and that is I really like rock music of all kinds. I like jazz, blues, funk, soul, R&B, pop, folk, classical, metal. I don't listen to a lot of hip-hop and rap, and that's nothing against the genre itself. I really want to get more into it. It's just that I tend to gravitate more towards notes, rhythms, melodies, and harmony above lyrics. So I like progressive rock more than I like punk rock. And that is, I tend to lean towards the song construction. I listen for the song composition over any sort of political or social meaning, which those things are very important, but it's a little secondary for me. Oftentimes in my favorite music, I don't even remember the words, so that's just the kind of listener I am, and it gives you a little context for this list. And I really hope people see these year-end lists, these year-end rankings, just as an opportunity to find new music, to discover something interesting, divergent, unique, and just have a conversation, because that's what it's about. It's not about trying to quantify the value of music somehow objectively, which is completely impossible, which we all know. It would be totally boring if everyone had the same list and everyone agreed that these albums were the best, because then we never branch out, and that's the beauty of it. So see this video, see this list as sort of my personal show and tell. At number 30, we got the most intoxicating female voice in indie rock, Jen Wassner from the duo Wye Oak with their fifth album, Tween. And Tween is sort of this developmental state of limbo. And while that in-betweenness accurately summarizes the chronological order of these songs and the conception of them between Shriek, their last album, and 2011 Civilian, it actually feels more like an arrival point, a perfect merger of the gritty guitars and waterfall synths. One of my favorite riffs of the year is on the song Too Right, but really all these 8 songs flow together pretty nicely for this being sort of a compilation. At number 29, Canadian multi-instrumentalist Andy Shauf gives us his conceptual second album filled with little vignettes about a party and all its attendees. And refreshingly, drunken debauchery doesn't really play a big part in this album at all, which you'd think it would. Instead, it's kind of focusing on the emotional tension and insecurities that bubble under the surface. It's a warm and intimate listen with sweet melodies and pleasing progressions. And Shauf also finds a way to communicate the more depressing aspects of a small town get-together with hushed acoustic instrumentation and drums that feel so tight and understated, it's almost like someone's just tapping their fingers on their work desk. At number 28, it's Sian Nugent with Night Fiction. The Irish guitarist Sian Nugent kind of has a similar finger-picking style as like a Burt Jank or a Leo Kottke, but on this album he's breaking away from everything he's done in the past, like the long, extended jams, very guitar-focused, into something more personal and lyric-centered. I think this is pretty similar to, but it ended up being much stronger for me than Riley Walker's new album. And the songs are so diverse, from the romping southern rock of the opener Lost Your Way to the mellow horns and subdued 6/8 sway of the album Highlight Shadows. Night Fiction is really simply some good rock and roll. At number 27, some very young music students from France, and unless you're really deep into the math rock community, these guys are pretty much unknown. It's Dear Belling Cafe with their album Wait for the Jazz. I'm kind of afraid they're not going to find enough success with this project to continue, but I just keep coming back to this album again and again. And this album, it's got all the rhythmic irregularity of math rock, but then also it's got all the weird chord sequences and chord structure of jazz. And somehow they incorporate incorporate this sludgy metal guitar and then go back to this contemplative jazz without a jarring transition. This album's just got some great experimentation without sacrificing melody. Alright, number 26, we're moving along here. We got Whitney's Light Upon the Lake. It seems like no one could ignore the magic of this debut, made up from the rubble of the Smith Westerns breakup. It's simple, it's effective. My only real complaint with this album is it seems a little front heavy, with the back half of the album really paling in comparison to just the joyride that is those first couple tracks. I love the country twang guitars and those innocent falsetto vocals. It's one of the most focused in sound of any debut album. And this cover is pretty unique and recognizable. They took a genre of indie rock that can be pretty stale, pretty forgettable, and made it iconic. At number 25, it is Utopia Defeated by D.D. Dumbo. D.D. Dumbo is the moniker of Oliver Hugh Perry from Australia. This is an album that is so low budget but sounds so high budget. Pretty fascinating pop instrumentals on this thing, from hand drums to clarinets. It's all very manipulated and measured. Oliver's vocals are definitely impressive and remind me of a mix between Sting and Samir from Young the Giant. And number 24 is Snarky Puppy's Culcha Vulcha. Snarky Puppy's grown into perhaps the most recognized jazz group of the past couple decades, with live album after live album, virtuosic playing, and massive jazz funk grooves. Even though this is complex and intelligent music in the highest of highbrow genres, Snarky Puppy feels approachable. And part of that accessibility is why I love them. They make emotions and feeling the number one priority, and that's what I think draws in fans that don't listen to jazz regularly. Culcha Vulcha is surprisingly only the second studio recorded LP from these guys. It's one that explores the deeper subtleties of their sound while still keeping those boisterous moments around. I love the soft electronic nuances in a song like Gemini or Beatbox. It's just another great album from one of my favorite bands. Next up, we got 23. It's Into It, Over It with Standards. Evan Weiss's third full-length album as Into It, Over It is once again sort of this emo revival, but with less predictable progressions. There are some very specific lyrical references and messages towards certain people in Evan's life, and some are very challenging and tough to figure out, but overall there's plenty of wit to go along with a healthy dose of cynicism. Favorite tracks are Required Reading and Who You Are Does Not Equal Where You Are, and also the drum-heavy Adult Contempt. This album has some relentless drumming brought on by the new drummer Josh Sparks. At number 22 is a band that's absolutely on top of the game when it comes to prog metal and jazz fusion. And in my days of scouring the internet for a band that sounds this good in this style, I just can't find one. It's Mammoth with the album Deviations. Even with all the insane technical performances going on, this album is so crisp and clean, and they incorporate electronics in a seamless way, which we didn't get as much on their last album from last year. And if you just despise bands like Dream Theater, then yeah, it's gonna take you a while to get into a band like this, but I think some of the funk and jazz elements of this group can kind of bring in a wide variety of music fans. They've even got this little speaking sample of the author David Foster Wallace in the song The Acclamation of Sedation. The number 21 band burst onto the scenes this year with a goofy debut called Awkward Pop Songs. Then just before convincing everyone of being a joke band, they come back in the same year with another release, this time just as fun, just as engrossing, but with just a pinch of serious musicianship and maturity. Versace Summer by the mathy pop-punk trio Jank was the most fun, hands down, I've had listening to music this year. And these guys know how to trim the fat. They managed to squeeze in all the most infectious licks and hooks in these really short songs averaging about 2 minutes. At number 20 is the guitarist of the post-rock band Tortoise with probably the most purely jazz album I have on the list. It's Jeff Parker with The New Breed. And the opening track is the highlight for me, ebbing and flowing back and forth from this sample-heavy hip-hop beat back to this mesmerizing ambience with room for improv. And it's all centered around a couple of amazing riffs. The second is just impossible to forget. I really love Tortoise. but this album totally outdid their album, The Catastrophist, from this year. It's just another example of really relevant 21st century jazz. At number 19, it's an album with so much energy, so much swagger. It's King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with Nonagon Infinity. This band just keeps on doing it. 8 full-length albums in 4 years. That's 2 a year, people. That's 2 a year. The beauty of this band is they can experiment to their heart's content, but they still have that unmistakable King Gizzard quality that's instantly recognizable. And their last 3 albums are their best, in my opinion. The Jazz of Quarters, the Sunshine Folk of Paper Mache Dream Balloon, and now Nonagon Infinity. Unrelenting, extremely confident. It's one unending psych jam, and they totally pulled it off. I get so pumped listening to this thing. At number 18, it's an album that grew on me as the year went along. It's Yeasayer's Amen and Goodbye. And I said quite a bit about it in my review, but I'll say that Half Asleep and Dead Sea Scrolls are my favorite songs. At number 17, it's the second album, Zoe, from the band TFVSJS. That's TFVSJS. This is a 5-piece instrumental math rock and post-rock band from Hong Kong. Zoe just snuck up and tabletop me this year with its rapid-fire rhythms and heavy, heavy atmosphere. Sometimes I get a little bit sick of the happy-go-lucky sound in math rock. Yeah, I love bands like Toe, I love Cian, but this just, sometimes you need that gut punch. And some of it has the more typical perkiness of some of those bands, but I love the darker ambient post-rock elements that remind me of bands like Caspian and Godspeed You Black Emperor. You'll have to buy this one on Bandcamp, but it is worth it. At number 16 is another one that's instrumental. It's really a rare gem that's just so unique that it instantly draws you in. It's the self-titled album from House of Waters, released on Snarky Puppy's label Ground Up. And you could say the spirit of jazz links these two groups, but House of Waters is a completely different machine. They only have 3 guys, but put out this massive enveloping sound. And the instrumentation is the most interesting part about them. They've got the cajon, the 6-string bass, and a hammered dulcimer. The album does feature some other instruments, like the majestic cellos on Francesco, or the African Ngoni on Save Home, or the female singing on the song Hamza. The playing is nuts, but the melodies and the grooves are pretty easy to get into. It's great music to play at a party if you're going for something eclectic and interesting, but not overwhelming. And it's got influences from all over the Eastern world. This was really just a fantastic find this year.